Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the IC Topic Chats. Today, we're doing a course session. It's the first course session of one I hope to do every month. These course sessions are they're little mini lectures that are we do at the pre-conference workshops, and I say we, Laura, Keen, and I. And once upon a time, Gail Barrington, she passed her materials down to him, and we've adapted them. But I think kept the majority of her hard work in here. Anyhow, today's session is on pricing considerations. Really, when I say pricing, we're talking about fees. And how do you identify your fees? What should I charge? What am I worth? And so, if you're like me, you struggle with this. And this is one of the reasons when I first got involved with the IC TIG back in 2011, I started thinking, am I charging enough? And as it turns out, I wasn't. How do I know what I'm supposed to charge? And then at some point I figured it out. I went to Gail's session and I figured out how I should be charging and what I should be charging. And then I was curious. Back in 2003, they did a IC-TIG survey, and they calculated fees. And I was curious what's going on now. So I pushed, as I kind of got involved with the leadership of the TIG, to redo that survey. And so we're going to share some of those data today too. So if you're like me, you think about, forget the slides to work. All right, you may be like this, or you might be a little bit like, I don't know. And then after a while, you start to feel a little bit like this. What you really feel like telling your client is, all right, not going to this doesn't want to play today, does it? All right, let's see if it works now. Hypothetically, in our mind, when we get the big project, we feel like this. But why are we talking about this? Why do we think about pricing? At the end of the day, you need to set that price that works for you, right? You need fair compensation for your work. And I think to a large extent, a lot of us are taken advantage of because we don't know, and particularly the independent consultants. And I think that we don't understand our value relative to what our clients are getting. And so we need to think about what's fair for what we're doing. In order to stay in business and maintain your independence, you need to price yourself correctly, because someday you need to pay yourself. You need to pay subcontractors. You need to pay employees. You need to pay your rent. If you have rent, you need to minimally pay for your phone bill, right? Little things. You need to be able to afford to get your car so you can get around to your clients. We're not going to get into expenses today, but not too far into expenses, just a little bit. But you need to be able to afford these things. And so there are different pricing strategies that may vary. I love this little idea here. This is from, I don't know which book I read, but I think about the carpenter who is brought in to fix a squeak in the floor. And then he turns around and he gives this invoice back to his client. The nail costs 25 cents. Knowing where to place the nail is $60, right? And why is my bill $60.25? And that's how the explanation comes. We do that every day because we have a deep competency in program evaluation, and some of us know a lot about qualitative, quantitative, know about logic models. These are not everyday concepts to a lot of our clients. We bring them in, and we have an efficiency with their work too. A lot of us have been doing this for a number of years, whether we were independent consultants or if we worked as an internal evaluator somewhere, or even if we worked in a research shop and we're just applying those research skills into an evaluation context. We are really, really experienced people, and we help our clients out in ways that have direct value to them. And so it's okay to charge $60 for knowing where to place the nail. So we're talking about fees. It's good to talk a little bit about fee definitions. Alan Weiss talks about these fees as payments, usually in cash, sometimes in equity, which compensate the consultant for the value delivered to the client. And for him, it's really important. He talks about value because what we charge oftentimes is to our clients is directly related to what that value is, right? And And the reality is what we can charge is directly related in their minds to the value you're providing to them. If it's simply meeting the needs of a very high-priced, a very expensive program implementation, that value is sometimes directly a 5% or a 10% metric that they put in there. That's the value. And that's as much as they're willing to give you, and that's as much as they have to give you in their mind. So if you're working on a $100,000 project, it's $10,000, 10%. If it's $1 million, it's $100,000. That's the value to them. I like to try and broaden the conversation and say things like, you know, we're providing you a value that you aren't just satisfying the needs of your program officers, but we're helping you think about moving your $25,000 project to a $2.5 million project because we're doing good evaluation, but that's another presentation. So what are some different types of fee arrangements? Well, we're talking about hourly and daily rates today, which are often referred to as per diem. And how do you come up with those actual rates? I also work on a fixed fee, sometimes referred to as a standing offer. So I actually use an hourly and daily rate to estimate what my fixed fee is. So when they say I have got $10,000 to spend on an evaluation for the year, I would come back and say, here's how I intend to use your $10,000 on the different activities. Here's the deliverables, but then I can show them very clearly how I came up with those deliverables and the number of hours that I estimate it will take based upon the tracking that I do and the hours that I follow with the work that I do and my consultants do. Sometimes we're talking about retainers. Retainers is where somebody would give you a set amount of money for a set amount of hours or access or however you put it through in your contract. Sometimes we're talking about value-based billing. That's a session in and of itself. That is where you're directly connecting your value, the amount that you're asking for, to the value of what you're providing. I like to refer to my dad sometimes in this because he actually did an hourly rate of $250 an hour. And I think it was too low because he was working in the oil and gas industry, and in the accounting independent consulting that he did for them, he was saving them millions of dollars whenever he'd sit down and do whatever he did with accounting, which God knows what it was, but it was super important to them. And he was able to, quote unquote, find oil on the books. And he hypothetically could have been using a more value-based billing. But really, I put contingency fee. Frequently, I don't work on a contingent. I put a line through that because particularly when you're writing grants, or people might say, I'll pay you if. I don't do that. I never work on that kind of a fee arrangement. I think it's unethical to some extent because you may be inclined, there's a conflict of interest there. You may be inclined to write things in a way that are not true. You're at least tempted that way. If somebody wants me to do work, I say this is the amount of effort it's going to take, and this is what it costs. But really, we're talking about hourly / daily rates and fixed fees today. We're talking about calculating what our hourly rate could and should be. I should point out, and I think I'm going to find a way to get this link for you and put it in the chat. There's some materials for you here. There is a handout, which I'm going to reference. So go ahead and click that link and you'll find it there. And there's also an Excel spreadsheet that I'm going to reference today. Really, it boils down to this. You want to know what your hourly rate is. You first identify the number of days that you can work in a year, right? It's not 365, I can tell you that much. And even if you break it down to perhaps, I forget what the actual number would be, like 180 working days. Let's say you go to work 180 days, whatever that number is. You're not working 8 hours a day on billable work. You need to, I'm not getting any, nobody's paying me for my time, as we were talking about earlier, right now. This is not billable time right now. This is what I consider professional development time. So what are those actual days that you can work on billable activities? What are your costs? What does it cost for internet? What does it cost for insurance? What does it cost? I mean, legitimate costs, not what does it cost to buy new shoes? That's not going to go into your billable rate. What does it cost for your activities that are associated with your consulting practice? And then what is your desired compensation? Notice how I used compensation. Because we have to pay taxes on our compensation and things like that. We have to pay employer taxes on our compensation, or however you're set up. I do because I'm an S corp. But what is that amount? Add those together and then divide by your billable days. That's it. It's 5 steps. It's really that simple. We're going to walk through it. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of nuance here, and I'm going to try and get into some of that nuance. But that's the big idea. There's 5 pieces to this. How much work how many days can you work? What are your costs? How much do you want to get paid? Add it together, divide, right? Simple. It's really not more complicated than that, but let's take a look at some of these things. And of course, it is not open yet. Setting your fees. So if you clicked on that link, just like I am right now, you can see the same thing I'm seeing. So this is the actual handouts that we use in the pre-conference workshop. There we go. So the way we look at it is you have 52 weeks that you can work during the year. That's 260 days. So that was the number. You're going to identify the days that you can't work. So you'd estimate the number of vacation days and holidays and whatever sick time or paid time off. Again, I don't use sick time. I used to say, what's my paid time off? That's just like one thing. Public or statutory holidays, very Canadian. You should know Gail is very Canadian here. I don't think we ever use the word statutory. I don't know where that comes from. What are you going to do that's not paid? How much time are you going to spend in marketing? How much time are you going to spend in professional development? How much time are you going to spend in administration? And there's some suggestions here. And then you add these things up and subtract that from 52, or 52 subtracts, however that works. That's how many weeks you can work, times 5 is the number of days. So I love this. I won't change this just because I think it's awesome. But I can't imagine taking 4 weeks of vacation, but that is me. When Gail put this together, this is what she wrote, that she takes 4 weeks of vacation, 2 weeks are off for public and statutory holidays, and 1 week for sick time. So at the end of the day, it's 52 minus 7, and that's 45 days available to quote unquote work. That's all you have left to work. Take out 5 weeks for administration, 2 weeks for professional development, and 5 weeks for marketing. I know that seems like a lot, but you do need to make sure you're spending enough time on those things. That leaves you with 33 weeks of billable time for the year. And that's the big calculation. And I'm going to show you how I didn't go into the details here, but I actually went back and I looked at my I did this before. I think I looked at my 2019 year and looked at how many hours I worked billable versus on the job with these types of activities, and what my resulting weeks of billable time are. I'm going to show you that in the Excel spreadsheet in a little bit. So at the end of the day, you have 33 weeks or 165 days of billable time. That's your step 1, identifying the actual number of days or weeks that you can work on billable activities. Then we get into finances and fees. This first piece on startup cost worksheet, I leave it in there because it's interesting, but it's not germane to our conversation today. It's the sorts of things, if you're starting up, what are the things you should anticipate spending? So use that how you like, but so I'm not going to take that out. That's paid the next 2 pages. But what are your annual overhead expenses? Here's suggestions for you to think about what you should be thinking about. Licenses, any kind of legal fees. If you're paying an accountant to do your your taxes. You want to throw that in there. If you have regular time with a lawyer to review your contracts, what kind of travel that's not compensated by your clients do you need to put in there? Not CS is right there. If you're going to AEA, and someday we'll be able to travel to AEA again, hypothetically, I think we're allowed to say this. It's New Orleans, by the way, in 2022. So you might want to book your travel now. That would be something that would go in here. Kind of accounting fees. Do you have somebody helping you with your, oh, there's the tax prep. Do you have somebody helping you on a regular basis with your accounting? Or are you paying, like I do, for QuickBooks? Get bank charges? I have more than I'd like. Are you setting anything into retirement savings? You could easily not put this here in retirement savings and you could put that in your compensation. I think that's a totally fair thing. These are two separate items. They're going to be added together. But in this situation, the way that Gail set it up, retirement savings are an overhead expense. What kind of insurance are you going to have? If you have a business and you're working with clients, you need general liability. You likely need professional liability. If you have employees, you need workers' compensation. Health and life. We're actually getting health insurance at our practice now. I think it's going to start May 1st, which is crazy. That's a whole other conversation for another day. You also, because we work in data, the one that we just got, what is it called? Cyber liability insurance. I have clients requiring that now. Never heard of it until about 2 months ago. And now it's a thing. What you spending on marketing? And let's read some of these. What other PD? Membership renewal. You're gonna, are you a member of AEA? Hope so. Books and reference materials, rent, equipment, and supplies, right? We could do a whole session on home office expense. Basically, if you're working at home, you identify your square footage of your house and square footage of your workspace, which, by the way, I also included my garage spot because I had a company car, but it's 5% of my house. So I looked at our household expenses, and 5% of that for the year was monthly of $265.49. So I pay my wife, I pay myself, but my wife gets all the money. $265.49. The other thing that I just realized has never been put in here, which is an expense, which is a really important one, is entertainment, food and entertainment. And because if you take a client out to lunch, if you're buying lunch for your staff, if you're on the road to go talk to people and you got to stop at Wendy's or something like that, that should be an expense in here. And she didn't put it there, but that could be an other. All right, so I'm going to go to the worksheet now. There it is, fee calculation example. All right, so here's what I believe this is Gail's original example is right here. So if your desired salary pre-tax, how do you decide that, by the way? You decide you do your desired salary, at least the way I do it, is if I left my job, if this whole consulting thing dissipated into thin air and I had to go get a job, or if I looked at a peer who has a similar job, what are they getting paid? So I know there is a director of the STEM Center at the local university here, Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, or SIUE, and she is paid 125, actually I think it's 105, but $105,000 a year. It's public information. So I see her as a direct peer. I would be a director at a center if I were doing this for someone else. So I use that as my desired salary. So think about that. I will point out here that this is probably the biggest number that's going to affect everything, right? You're 75,000 in this situation. If you put in 500,000, it's going to throw everything off, and all of a sudden your billing rate's going to change. But 75,000 is the number she used. This spreadsheet, by the way, I developed all the formulas. If you just put things into the yellow areas, it's a way for you to put that together. She forecasted, Gail did, your annual overhead costs at $10,000. And I don't know where that number comes from, aside from the fact it's just a number that she put in. And so you see it's a formula here, so you want to probably put it over here. 125 billable days. I think it's the days that she put into her spreadsheet. Now, what's a buffer? She calls it profit. I call it buffer because I don't like. In fact, on some of my clients, I can't discuss profit. By the way, everything I do is transparent to anybody who asks for it. If they want to look at it, I'm happy to show it. I'm working with federal dollars, tax dollars from the federal government. If anybody wants to audit me, I'm at any point ready to show them all of this stuff. So I like the word buffer better than profit. Maybe the exact same thing, but it's fudge factor. It's because you may be off. It gives you buffer with the number of hours. If you think that you're going to work 75 hours on an activity and it really took about 85, then well, that's not going to fit within a 10% buffer, but you get where I'm going with this. Gives you some room, so your daily, so your cost gives you some space there. So you've got your desired salary, you've got your overhead costs, you've got those add together to the annual cost you throw in. You divide that by total billable days. You see all these calculations happening here. You give a buffer, so you have a little bit of room there. Your final daily rate is $748. And then you can divide that by 8, and that's $93.50. That's it. That's how you develop this stuff. Now I'll show you my real example. 125,000 was 105 plus if I figure out benefits and different things for me, I would be at 125. I looked at my actual overhead costs and it was 19 some and some change, and I just rounded to 20, but that's really what my overhead was. I have more overhead because I'm doing more administration, and because of that, I also have fewer billable days. But it's just the factor of having a firm and running a firm versus being the sole person. So this overhead amount is probably higher. I have a thought. I'm going to get to that in a second. Add these together. Daily rates $14.50, buffer of 145. We end up $15.95 for a daily rate, or $200 an hour. And that's what I just recalculated this using some predated data, but this is what I just put into my most recent proposal. And that's how I calculated it. All right, I'm going to pause for a second because I'm going to talk about just the ethics of this stuff in just a second. But if anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. It is okay to charge more per hour. Enough of us aren't talking about this, and we should be talking about this more. Patricia Steele wrote a really good book. She presented to us back in early January. And I want to put this out there. A lot of people are saying, Gail's book is great, but I hear that a lot. Gail's book is great, but I wish ... And I hear a lot of other things after that. And Gail's book is great, but this is another one I want to put out there. And I think I'm going to write a book review and put it into the newsletter. Think about reading Patricia Steele's book. It's really short. It's not as directive. It's not as operational as Gail's book. It's a lot more, there's a way I would put it. Patricia's, I think she goes by Patri. Her book is like you have a cup of coffee and you're sitting there with her every week just chatting about your business. It's like you're at Starbucks, just sitting in one of those comfy chairs talking about your business, and she's just laying the advice on. That's the way it feels, and it's good for that purpose. And she has a whole thing about setting fees. But the big aha moment in there for me and for her was when she realized she was charging, who knows what, $100 an hour, and that peers who were working for bigger firms were charging $200+ an hour. And she's like, why am I not charging more? And so she was influenced by that. Here's what I want to say. If you are brand new in your consulting and you don't know how to do things and it takes you longer, your billing rate should be lower. If you're really great at doing things, if you've been doing surveys for a while, you have quick references, you're not spending a lot of time thinking about how to get things done, you know exactly what to do, it doesn't take you as long to do things. You should be charging more per hour. It's totally fine. Your compensation should be higher because you're good at what you do and you're really fast at it. Create the work you want. Thanks, Rachel. I love that. All right, I'm going to get back to the presentation. Give you some ethics, ideas, and thoughts on this stuff. Okay, so what do I charge, right? Hypothetically, you should go back to what I was saying and do that calculation. I'm going to say this over and over again because I'm going to get into some sensitive stuff that people have. When we were doing this back in 2016 and I started reporting things, I got lots of references to the Security and Exchange Commission because we asked everybody what they bill, and we reported it. I started sharing it on the that ICT listserv, and people said, you can't do that. And I said, well, we did it before. It was in a published journal article in 2005 through the New Directions for Evaluation. I said, well, we're planning to do that. And we did subsequently do it. But people said, this is price fixing and you need to be careful and make sure you know these things. And of course, I went to the AEA executive director, and as a good executive director does, she goes to her lawyer, and then they shut everything down and they said, you can't do this. So I said, all right, I'll report it all through New Directions for Evaluation. And so I will say, we are not telling you what you should charge. This is just for your own reference, so you understand what people are doing. And I'm only showing one slide. There's more out there. I say get this journal article if you want it. I'll give you the specific link to it. But what people are charging across the country are these amounts. The median is no big surprise, $100 an hour. And that's why I was saying it. And if you look at it across different things, more or less, you are right in the happy zone if you're between 80 and 127. Only start thinking about these things after you do your calculations. But like I was saying, on the spreadsheet, you can play around with this number. If you're in a comfortable space, if you put 65,000 in there, your billing rate is 116. Now that's my example. If you think you're worth 50,000, I think everybody on this call is worth more than 50,000. By the way, your hourly rate is $66. If a subcontractor comes to me and says their hourly rate is less than $80, I say you're wrong, and I give them $80, by the way. And that's based upon just knowing, really, if you're doing this and if you're worth what you, if you know what you're doing, you're worth $80 an hour in my mind. So I will say that much. I'm not telling you what you should bill, but I'm just saying most of us should be between $80 and $127 an hour, at least at the early stages. I think the overwhelming number of the people who responded to this were individuals working in their own practices. It gets a little more expensive when you're working as you have fewer hours and you're the firm director. That's why my rate is a little higher. Let's see, how do we know what to pay subcontractors? I would start by saying, what do you think you're worth, and ask them to validate that. My father, again, he billed at $250 an hour in the oil and gas industry. He had a subcontractor who worked with him who billed $200. He billed $200. Actually, I think he also billed $250 for the subcontractor, and he kept $50 for every hour that guy worked. And I was like, that is a racket I want to get in on. Of course, I never did figure out oil and gas accounting, so I'm not going to figure that one out anytime soon. Should we adjust the rates we bill clients? That is a loaded question. I'm going to leave that one for the chat when we get done here. But here's just the numbers of what our peers were charging in 2015 when we did this survey, and we reported in the 2019 journal article. One piece of it, an interesting piece, is that in 2003, the median rate was, wait for it, $100 an hour. So if you account for inflation, we're actually getting paid less. So you might want to consider that too. I actually think we can make a case for the fact that most of our peers who are very experienced at what they do may be billing too little, I think. All right. That's why I put this little graphic together for you. Everyone charges $100 an hour. Yeah, I'll calculate it myself. I hope you do. That's the point. Here's an aha moment for me. And this is just something that doesn't even relate to, it definitely relates to consulting, but it's a broader statement. And it's something I think about with thinking about talking to students, my own children. Your fees are in direct correlation to your client's annual budgets or what they view as their value, right? The closer you are aligned, actually, the way I think about it is the closer you are to the money, the better ability you have to make it. That's the way I think about it. But if you have an understanding for the value that you're providing to your clients, that's the value you can ask for. And it goes back to what salary do you think you can justify in your calculations? If you're working in a federal context, you need to be able to share this very clearly. And it's not a matter of like, I'll bill what the client can pay, which I think is an interesting conversation in and of itself. But when you're working with my types of clients, the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Education, Department of Defense, I do need to be able to show very carefully why I came up with the fees that I came up with. So I do that. Thanks, Mary Mallory, about the audit conversation. I think that's totally true. The value determination, let's see here. Amanda was like, can you give a tangible example of that concept? I'm going to talk about that in the chat with you, Amanda. All right. But back to your fees, the direct correlation to your client's annual budgets. And this is why I talk about this, more or less why if people push back on what my fees are, I say, okay, so here's what we're providing you in a value. And I think about what they're trying to do. If they're at a $25,000 project and they want to take it to 2.5 million, well, how are we going to do that? You want to do a quantitative, a very detailed analysis. It's going to take time, but at the end of the day, we're going to be able to say with some level of certainty, statistical certainty, that your program has had the intended impacts. And hey, maybe we're ready for that next level of program funding. All right, some ideas for you. First, know your rate for the purpose of scoping. You need to understand what your billing rate is. You don't start scoping out a project until you know what your value is. You should start with saying $200 an hour, $125 an hour, $80 an hour, whatever it is. So you need to be thinking about these. And before you start a conversation, just had a conversation yesterday with some peers, and we had a potential $10,000 budget that we needed to work around. How should we divide these amounts up? And my first thought is, well, what's your daily billing rate, right? You need to think about doing this analysis on a regular basis. So as you get better, what you do, you're no longer developing the instrumentation, you're reusing instrumentation. It doesn't take you as long. It's okay to consider your value in relation to your client's program. Now, I wouldn't say you're changing your hourly rate or your daily rate. I wouldn't suggest that. I know people do that, and that's another conversation for the chat, and we talk about it all the time. I don't do that. I know what my value is, and that's what I stick to, and I carry that across all my projects because that's what my time costs. I worry about charging one person $250 and another person $100 an hour because for the most part, everything's coming from the same source, the federal government. They have, audit regulations, and I worry that, I know it's different for some of you because you're thinking I'm going to lower my rate for working with a non-profit client. But that's what we're talking about. Consider your value in relation to your client's program. And this is just, this is common knowledge. If you're working with a non-profit client and they only have $100,000 a year annual revenue, there's not a lot of money to be made there, right? I work with larger $1 million per year programs. There's a larger budget opportunity for me there, and that's part of my business strategy, right? But know what your value is, and just think about it from their perspective, not that's how you communicate it to them. You also have to understand it from your own perspective. Feel free to use these resources that I provided to you. Reference that NDE article, but know that you're not supposed to use those rates, right? Finally, before we get into the chat, I know a lot of you guys have been following me as I was here in Edwardsville, but also I was in Mexico. I should share that my father did pass away on Monday at 6 a.m. and it was pretty sad. He was a CPA and I referenced him several times today. And whenever I would talk to him about independent consulting, he would always say the same piece of advice. He would say your most important skill. He would ask me actually, what's your most important consulting skill? And he'd wait for my answer, and I'd say stuff like having great relationships with my clients, or beautiful reports, or great skill set. He'd always say accounts receivable, like an accountant should say. Anyhow, back on some references here. Here's the two books I think you should look at. I'm putting Patricia Steele into the next because I think it's important. A lot of people would also say $1 Million Consulting by Weiss. Certainly want to think about that, particularly when you start thinking about value-based billing. Be careful with it with your, if you're going to get audited, why are you charging so much? How are you calculating your profit? And here's our upcoming sessions. Obviously today is 4:15. Next week, by the way, Jessica and Megan are going to talk about transitioning from academia to consulting. So it's going to be exciting. And again, I'm going to be doing a core topic once a month, and the next one will be identifying your niche, which a lot of you guys have heard, maybe be bored by about that point. But I'm going to do all of these topics once a month. Oh, Ann Price is going to be doing handling scope creep, and we did get Julie Solomon based upon a session a couple weeks ago to do planning for business travel. I think that's going to be some costing too there. All right, with that, I'm going to put us on, I'm going to pause, stop share, figure out how to stop the recording, and let's go to chat.